Hello everyone, welcome to the news desk here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt in Dublin. Rich hanging alongside Hall of Famer Luis Scott-Vargas. I'm going to talk very little, he's going to talk a lot, and that's just the way it should be, Luis, because we're going to talk limited and the draft archetypes. So why don't we take a look, first of all, at the kind of headline for all 10 of the colour pairs. Let's show you what they're all trying to do, because they range from white and blue with blink, blue-black improvised control, then it's aggro, aggro, aggro in 3 shades through the allied colour pairs, black, red, green, green, white. And then when we go with the enemy colour pairs, if you will, white-black artifact recursion, blue-red energy artifacts. There's more energy ramp with green-blue, vehicles with red-white, and black-green +1/+1 counters. So we're going to go into those in a little more detail for you. So Luis, let's get underway. We'll start with the friendly pairs, and that means we're going to go with blue, white, and blink. What is this all about?
So the blue-white deck ends up playing a bunch of cards with enter the battlefield effects. Of course, Revolt is part of this. Revolt does often trigger when you play your card. And then cards like Illusionist Stratagem, Aviary Mechanic, Acrobatic Maneuver, because if you use something like Acrobatic Maneuver on a creature with Revolt, it'll see the fact that it itself had left the battlefield and it'll trigger its Revolt. Blue-white also naturally just has a lot of flyers, so a blue-white flyers deck often looks a lot like on these lines.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because blue-white traditionally is all about flying over, and often we use the word tempo when we talk about blue-white, but some of these bounce effects kind of feel almost like anti-tempo. It's like, well, I made my 2-drop, and now here's an Aviary Mechanic which is going to send my 2-drop back to hand so that I get more advantage on later in the game, but it is later in the game. Is blue-white not a tempo deck, really?
I think you're going to see more blue-white flyer tempo decks than really leaning into the blink stuff.
Okay. Hard to play for beginners? Easy? Where does it sit in the range?
I actually think blue-white is kind of on the easier range, because if you just assemble your Hinterland Drake into Dawnfeather Eagle, maybe bounce one of their creatures, just fly over for the win.
Right, I mean, it is pretty straightforward to see. I've got flyers, you haven't, or reach, that's important, but as long as the coast is clear, over we come. And certainly looking just anecdotally through the field, you do see a lot of these 4- and 5-drop flyers, particularly Dawnfeather Eagle seems like a super card.
Yeah, Dawnfeather Eagle is a card that strikes me as an uncommon, yet it is a common. It's the power level is just completely there.
Is there a number of those you wouldn't play? Like, is 4 too many?
Yeah, 4 is about the high end of the range.
Okay, but 3 you'd be, yeah, I'll
almost
take that third and
play 3, yeah.
All right, so that's white, blue, blink. Next up, we'll keep the blue, we'll add black, and this means improvise control. What's going on here, Luis?
Well, as the name suggests, Improvise is a big part of this deck. You have cards like Fenhauler and Bastion Inventor. If you're lucky enough to get a Battle at the Bridge, that's a nice rare. And cheap artifacts like Implement of Malice, for example, Adaptive Automaton, or Augmenting Automaton, and you just end up playing a lot of cheap artifacts, then playing 6 and 7 drops, above curve.
Okay. R&D sometimes talk about Improvise or similar mechanics as an A+B mechanic, where if you have an Improvise card with no artifact, it's literally blank. The Improvise does nothing. But if you have lots of artifacts and nothing with the word Improvise on, there's no payoff. So there is a fundamental tension every time you open a pack that has artifact and Improvise. So what is the balance? How many Improvise cards are people looking for? How is it? Is it really an artifact deck with 1 Fenhauler, 1 Windkin Raiders? How does it work?
You certainly want more artifacts than payoffs. So something along the lines of like 4 to 6 improvised cards, even 3 would be okay, and then like 8 to 10 artifacts is a good ratio. All
right, we keep the black, we move on to red. Now we're going to go aggro, aggro, aggro for our next 3 color pairs. Black-red is all about artifact aggro.
So this is a more beatdown focused version of the improvised deck. Sweatworks Brawler, makes a very strong appearance here. Aether Chaser and Aether Poisoner are both key because they add artifacts to the battlefield for improvise as well as just pressuring the opponent and being aggressive 2-drops.
How important, given that Aether Chaser makes you 1/1, Aether Poisoner does as 2-drops, how important is it to have some kind of defense at that point in the game? Because often, if you are playing a black-red deck and you go Aether Chaser on 2, there is this really big moment where they lay their second land, and then you go, if you make a prophetic Prism, for example, I'm feeling really good about things.
Oh yeah, this deck, and a lot of the red decks in particular, do punish the opponent if they don't get onto the board quickly.
All right, that's black-red. What about red-green? This time the flavor of aggro is about energy. So let's take a look at red-green for you. What is the red-green deck trying to do?
It's an aggressive deck for sure. It goes a little bigger than some of the other decks. It still wants the aggressive 2-drops, but now it actually looks to curve up to 5, maybe even 6, depending on if it has like Lifecraft Cavalry. Cal Prowler is actually a card in this deck, because the big green creatures paired with cheap red cards and red removal is a good combination.
So there's a card on there on screen, Lathnu Hellion, which was a really interesting card in Kaladesh, and certainly there was a lot of fun gameplay if you were playing with it or against it. How much energy do they have left? Is it going to die this turn, or are they, after combat, going to make another energy maker? Right. It feels like energy's quite tight this time around. Because of cards like Aetherstream Leopard, there are lots of things that you kind of do want to use your Aether Chaser mana or your Aetherstream Leopard mana, energy, as it were, on those cards, and that actually a card like Lathnu Hellion doesn't often have energy just floating around spare. Has it got tighter energy?
Certainly, the energy mechanic as a whole is greatly diminished with the addition of Aether Revolt, because there's new themes in Aether Revolt, things are going in a slightly different direction. You end up having fewer energy enablers and fewer energy sources, so cards like Lathnu Hellion did get a lot worse.
Right, okay, so we go from red-green to the last of our allied pairs. This is green-white. Revolt aggro.
So Revolt is the kind of main theme here. So you're going to try to pair cards like Renegade Map, like the implements, in order to trigger Revolt and play your Revolt cards with whatever additional bonus they come with. This deck is a little bit mixed in kind of how it wants to play out, which is why I would expect to see it drafted a little less than some of the other archetypes, because yes, it's nominally an aggro deck, but it's trying to set up these Revolt turns, which either cost you additional mana if you want to sacrifice an implement, or maybe you just don't play your 2-drop on turn 2 if you want to get the bonus.
But what you said there was that it's maybe drafted a little less than normal, and what that means is that if you are in this pair, those Countless Gears Renegades, for example, 2-drop, 2/2, and with Revolt you get a 1/1 as well, you can get 4 or 5 of those, which means that the first one you're happy to play as a straight, what we call a bear, a grizzly bear, a 2-mana 2/2 with no upside, because you've got the next one lined up for when it trades for their 3/2, for example. So actually, I think the very fact that it maybe is underdrafted makes it more desirable, because you can throw some things under the bus to make Revolt happen.
Yeah, Revolt it ends up being a slightly less impactful theme than Improvise, so that's why we've seen a lot of the drafters so far focus more on Improvise. But if you get the right combination of Revolt and Revolt enablers, there are some powerful things going on there.
So let's move across to the enemy color pairs. So these are pairs that don't naturally work together, but if you have the cards, why not? Here's white-black, a deck I like very, very much. Artifact Recursion, Luis.
I love this deck in triple Kaladesh. With the addition of Aether Revolt, the format seems to have sped up a bit, so getting into the game state where you're getting full value off your like Restoration Specialists and Resourceful Returns is a little tougher, but the payoffs are there, and black-white can assemble a good late game.
What do you make of what we call the Signpost Uncommon, which is Hidden Stockpile? So that's a card that's put into the pack so that if you're not really sure where you go, you look at the gold card, it's white and it's black, it points you in a direction. There's been a lot of talk about that card. What do you make of Hidden Stockpile?
Hidden Stockpile is a good card. It fits quite well into these white-black decks. Even if defensive decks are a little harder to draft in Aether Revolt because the format is so proactive, Hidden Stockpile does do some work. All
right, now we've already said that energy is perhaps a little lower just to get. So what about an energy artifacts deck? This is blue-red. So is this a strong archetype? And if so, why?
Blue-red aggressive decks are quite good. That's actually a big shift from Kaladesh, where blue-red was somewhat underdrafted as well. Aether Chaser, Aether Swooper, both very important because Improvise is such a big theme here, with Sweatworks Brawler and Bastion Inventor kind of shoring up the mid-game.
So what you absolutely want to do with either the Aether Chaser or the Swooper, hit on turn 3, that gets you your artifact, that gets you with your 3rd mana to 4, and there's your 3/3 Improvise with Menace.
Yeah, and that's the dream curve, and it just takes 2 commons, one of which there's a blue one and a red one, so it's not that hard to assemble.
Okay. A lot of the artifacts gravitate towards that deck. We touched on it in the preview show. What's your take of main deck artifact removal?
In general, I'm against the really narrow versions, but something like Appetite for the Unnatural, you end up being able to hit enchantments as well, so that actually provides enough versatility.
Right, so the first decommission in white decks you would play pretty much?
I'd say you're more than 50% to play it, you're not guaranteed to play it.
Okay, fine. So that's blue-red, energy artifacts. Next up is black-green. I think this is my actual favorite. You do disgustingly filthy things with black-green once you get going. My word.
Winding Constrictor is really the headliner here, and black-green is a lot of people's favorite archetype. It's just a really fun deck to play. Scrounging Bandar does a lot of work as well. You're trying to assemble ++1 counters and all the synergies that come with that, with the backup plan of just playing efficient green creatures and good black removal.
So there are some really very powerful things that don't look necessarily all that powerful. Implement of Ferocity is a card that you can do so much with because you're sitting there just putting a +1/+1 counter and cycling, but you know as you sit there with your Lifecrafter's Gift or your Rid-Scale Tusker and so on, that having creatures with +1/+ counters on them is a really big deal, and suddenly things just get nuts, and Winding Constrictor is absolutely the dream start.
Yeah, the deck has a lot of different paths to end up with an overwhelming board presence. Winding Constrictor encompasses a lot of those, though.
A lot of those, it really does. One question I have for you, though. I noticed I did an experiment on Magic Online. I played a whole bunch of drafts at what you might call a lower level, at an entry level, and then I went into the competitive, what used to be the 8-4s, if you like. And it was interesting to see how many fewer playables, of course, you're getting. Is this a forgiving format where if you take a few speculative picks early, you can move in pretty easily, or are there people out there on the floor right now with their, I started off black-green, I had to try and stay black-green, and I got cut off at the pass, and all this synergy thing that we're talking about so excitedly didn't come my way at all?
I think that in general you'll have enough playables. If you're in the wrong colors, you're in the wrong colors and you will get punished for that. But I find that you can move around a little bit in the first 5 or 6 picks and still end up with plenty of playables.
So that's black-green. Now red-white, this takes us back to Kaladesh because we always focus on the new, but guess what? If you're driving or flying or swimming around Kaladesh, vehicles are still kind of awesome, and red-white is about vehicles.
Red-white's still one of the best decks. The good red aggressive cards and the good white aggressive cards pair very nicely. Iron Tread Crusher is actually a nice pickup because unlike Renegade Freighter, which was of course a fantastic card, Iron Tread Crusher is not wanted by as many decks, so you can get a 7th pick Iron Tread Crusher, and it is what this deck wants.
So Peace Walker Colossus is on screen there. Now, are you someone who goes, that's a Consulate Dreadnought, that's a Peace Walker Colossus, I think I better play those and live the dream?
I do think both those cards are individually playable, and if you have them together, they do combine well.
Yeah, and Consulate Dreadnought certainly has other things that go with it. We've seen aerial modification. In round 1, someone tweeted that from the floor, that had just gone, Consulate Dreadnought 2-1, here's an aerial modification. I think that's a 9/13 flyer? That's quite good, it turns out. All right, so that's red-white. 1 to go. I'm not sure whether we've saved the best to last, but we have saved green-blue till last. It's Energy Ramp, Luis.
Well, you saved one of my favorite color pairs from Kaladesh for last. Because of the fewer energy cards in Aether Revolt, I don't actually like this deck as much as I used to.
Okay.
I think it's still there. I think you can still draft it, but both ramp and the energy part are not as much what I want to be doing in this format. So even though this deck does combine energy producers and ways to spend energy, has cards like Druid of the Cowl to ramp into your 5s and 6s, this deck seems like it's a little behind the 8 ball.
Well, whether you want to blink your way with white-blue or revolt aggro with green-white, maybe you want all the energy and the artifacts for blue-red, or maybe +1/+1 counters is your thing with black-green. Enjoy the 10 color pairs of this new draft format on Magic Online or wherever you get your draft on.